Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the Attleboro School Committee meeting of Monday, March 22nd, 2021. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. We'll start tonight with open forum. Is there anyone that would like to address the committee tonight at open forum? All right, I'm seeing a no, so I will go ahead and close open forum and move on to our business agenda. Start with the superintendent's report. Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. First, I'd like to start with our biweekly update on conditions. As I know you're all aware, we did see a slight uptick in both the cities and the schools numbers last week. On the whole, the trend over the last month has been pretty flat. This uptick only brings us back to where we were a month ago, is I guess what I'm trying to say, which has been pretty much a straight line. So in and of itself is not a point of a grave concern, but anytime the numbers are not heading in the right direction should give us cause for pause and to pay attention to what's going on. It does seem to many, and I'll include myself in them, that some people have decided that with the better weather and an improvement from conditions in the winter, that somehow the pandemic is over. And that is absolutely not the case. And the numbers that we're seeing both in the city and in the schools are a clear indication that we have a long way to go before we can become cavalier about the things that we face. The situation requires vigilance and thoughtful planning to keep us all safe. And as just an anecdote of the consequence of these things, I know that our neighbors at North have returned to school, and they're seeing real significant issues with quarantining as a result of the continued problems with the virus locally. And they had to quarantine 400 students last week, which is obviously a pretty significant disruption that they're struggling with. So as we continue forward with our plans, which we do believe conditions indicate is safe to proceed, it's just important that people understand that we are doing so cautiously. And we have taken the timeline that we have because we wanted to make sure that we're going to do this as safely and as methodically as possible. And that's part of what we're doing because we're still facing a pandemic. On the testing front, you may have noticed that we've started to make more of a push. We put out some public information. Schools are promoting it more. And very soon we're going to start calling family by family and really putting pressure on people to increase our numbers. Last week, we did see an 11% increase in the number of students that we tested. That's fantastic. But, the number of consents only went up by about 1.5%. The increase was mostly attributable to the fact that we are piloting the testing of our kindergarten and first graders. So those families had already provided consent. And so we just added them to the rules because we're getting so comfortable and confident with our testing program that we're now including the younger children. So as I've said the last couple of times, I'm going to say again, it's imperative that people provide consent for testing so that we can include them in participation and ensure that we know that the schools are safe. It's the best way for us to know that the schools are a safe place. It gives us the best information to make good decisions about what to do in the face of an outbreak or any other challenges. At this point, I'm not hearing any particularly convincing arguments why anyone would not participate. And we will now begin, because we are confident in what we're doing here and we do believe in it, we're going to start looking for ways that we can increase the pressure to have participation and with anything that we do. So in the coming weeks, we'll be giving you any of our ideas about actions that we can take to continue to increase that number, because it's very important to us that we do better than the 50% that basically we're operating at right now. On the vaccination front, I just want to remind everybody that our struggles with providing vaccinations for our teachers is entirely attributable to the fact that the state had developed an entire plan for how to handle a pandemic. And then in the middle of this one, just threw away that plan and came up with a different one. And so under the old plan, the city would have been the way that people in Attleboro would have got the vaccines, as we started to do and were doing effectively. And then they just went in a different direction, and now the city can't get its hands on the vaccinations that it needs for us to provide that. Now, the news that we've partnered with other communities so that at least we're going to have, looks like one day a week in the weeks to come is great news. But March was going to be the month that we were going to vaccinate our teachers through the city, and the state's decision to just abandon its plans is really at the heart of why we couldn't do more to help our educators. The good news is that anecdotally, a lot of them have been very successful in getting their hands on an appointment. A lot of them are either between their first and second dose, or actually are fully vaccinated. And those numbers are continuing to climb. We've looked into getting help and doing a clinic in our schools. We haven't been successful in setting anything like that up. And really what that comes down is, with taking the city away from us, you have to find a partner, and there just aren't a lot of partners available to us in this area. In fact, if you go on the state's map of all the places that offer vaccinations, it's a vaccination desert here in Attleboro. And that's part of why it's been hard to help our educators. So it's a regret that we have that we couldn't do more, but the good news is that we're helping teachers as best we can to support them when the only appointment they can get is during the school day. We've been very flexible in meeting their needs, and I think that's helped to get a lot of teachers vaccinated. And as more and more people get vaccinated, I think people's comfort and confidence about our ability to bring back our students is increasing, as we always knew would be the case. So we're happy that at least that's improving, but still a little bit cranky that it didn't go the way it should have. We've been very busy in the last 2 weeks since we last met, preparing for our return of students on K6 on April 5th, and then 7th and 8th on April 26th. Furniture has been significantly shuffled in the district to make sure that all the desks are where they need to be, and that we've removed desks where we don't need them to be. And that's been quite a bit of work by a lot of different people who I want to acknowledge their contribution to making this all happen. In many places, we've had to do significant alterations of spaces, remove temporary or movable walls, removing semi-permanent furniture that's in the way of getting the numbers that we need to have, completely changing the direction of how a room is set up. And unfortunately, in some cases, these decisions which allow us to finally, we talked about how many classrooms we have that were going to be a struggle. So we're finding ways to, squeeze in that last student so that we can keep the distance at 3 feet. But now the room is set up in a way that is just strictly for the good of making the guidance, and in no way support the educational decisions. We train teachers to really be thoughtful about how they use their space and how they use the space to help to draw the attention for students to what they're supposed to be learning about. All that goes out the window when you have to start flipping around which way the classroom goes, just so that you can fit all the desks in. So that's been a frustrating process for us, but we are making great headway, and we're going to be ready to return all the students as planned. We've been certainly doing a lot of work on the cafeterias and getting them ready for what life will look like, and other spaces, right? In a lot of places, as we talked about, none of our cafeterias fit everybody. So we have to find alternative spaces. A lot of places are using their classrooms as the overflow for the caf spaces, but in other schools, they have other places that they can use. So every building's a little bit different. That's why there's a team on each building that's helping to develop a plan that makes sense for that building. And that's altering a lot of spaces, putting, basically desks in place for lunches in places that normally wouldn't be lunch spaces. So that's another whole set of projects that have been going on. And then, of course, a lot of work around new protocols with twice as many kids in the building. Certain things had to be rethought as to how to safely move kids around, how to do breaks, how to do snacks, how to do the mask break, all those things. You have to make sure that you have enough room. And so, when you can put the kids all in at 3 feet, but when it comes time for their mask break, they have to be at 6 feet, right? So what does that look like? That's been a tremendous amount of work. And we're very lucky that we have some dedicated educators who are helping us to come up with good plans that make sense from their perspectives and, are compliant with the guidance. So we've been very, very busy and will continue to be right up through the return of our students. We did hear from DESE last week. They provided new guidelines for commencement ceremonies. There's nothing in that guidance that alters our thinking currently. The plans that Mr. Reed discussed at his presentation all work under the new guidance. And there's nothing in the guidance that opens up anything particularly new in terms of an avenue for doing something drastically different. Of course, we'll keep an eye on that, and things can, they've changed once, they can change again. And we're going to do the maximum of what's allowed. But we suspect that when it comes to the commencement guidelines, this is probably the rules that we're going to operate under in May. And the good news is that under that guidance, we'll also be able to do the senior activities, that we discussed as well. So all those plans seem to be well in order, and they're going to continue to pursue them. And I'm glad that we'll be able to do more for this senior class than we were able to last spring. In terms of the high school, they are busy planning those events. They're also working on a plan for what to do about Wednesdays. I think we can all anticipate the current schedule with remote Wednesdays. Doesn't. The rest of the district is so they're trying to work out a plan for that. We're going to wait a little bit before we finalize that plan because we have a conference call with the commissioner tomorrow. Perhaps he'll be letting us know what we can expect in terms of the guidance from the state on high schools. And so, we wouldn't make a change at the high school level to just make another change, 2 weeks later. So some sense of where they're coming from is going to inform our decision making. But in any case, we're preparing to be able to make a change, potentially in April as well, and for the high school schedule to have no more remote days, as there'll be no more remote days at the other levels. They are also planning for a full return if the state requires that. So they're looking at what they would have to do to make that work and all of the contortions that would be required. This is as we've discussed, a pretty challenging task, given that a full quarter of the classrooms don't fit at distance on any level. And there are a lot of problems that have to be thought through. But if the state requires it, then we have to do what is required. So they're trying to figure out what that would look like and how that would work. As we talked about, the real issue at the high school is you have both the combination of high class sizes, right? We have the highest class sizes in the district by far at the high school. It's not uncommon to have classes over 30 students. And we also have small classrooms at the high school. Some of our smallest rooms in the district are there. There are also some very strangely shaped rooms that, like, the square footage is what it is, but in terms of actually fitting people facing in one direction is a whole other challenge there. So, there's a lot to work through there. But we have to be prepared if the state requires action. And so I just want to clarify that the administration's position at this time is that, we do not recommend the committee calling for a return for the high school because the challenges that we face and the difficulty that will require with the amount of time that we have left is from our perspective, a questionable trade-off. And we would like to wait and see what the state has to say. And if either if they require it, then we'll report back what we're going to have to do to make that happen. We assume that there'd be a waiver process if in the end we decide it's not possible. But there'll also be decisions to be made that we would bring back to the committee for your consideration to the degree that we have any choices. But at this time, we think it's wise to wait and see what happens, given the problems that we face.
Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't it be self-undermining for DESE to force a group of students back regardless of their own guidance? In other words, if like for all year, we've been told that students should be kept 6 feet apart as much as possible, but no less than 3 feet apart. So doesn't it undermine all of their guidance if they now say, yeah, ignore all of that, just get everybody in?
Yeah, so they won't tell us that, but what we imagine that they'll tell us is that, and by the way, if you apply for a waiver, which we could have applied for a waiver for K to 8, and we chose not to. We did the hard work to make it work. We assume the same would be the same case for the high school, but we also imagine that. So if you apply for a waiver, they come down and they look at the spaces and try to solve your problem for you. And I know there are a lot of us who appreciate that. There's nothing worse than when the government comes and solves your problems for you, right? But we imagine that if they did that, they would look at our problems and say, look, you have a quarter of your classrooms don't fit the kids, but you have these other rooms in which the kids would fit, and you have these other classes in which the rooms are bigger and the classes are smaller. So just move everybody around so that they all fit. Technically on paper, you can fit everybody. But then the result of that is you have a science class, off in a room that's set up for English, and you have, an English class sitting in a science room, and vice versa. You have people strewn throughout the building in a way that is in no way tailored for what actually has to go on in the room. And to a degree, again, if we have to do it, we have to do it. But what are the educational impacts of some of these decisions that would have to be made? And by the way, where we have classes that are small and we have classes that are large, right? I mean, one solution of the problem is to cut the smallest classes, right? And create sections of things that there are too many kids in, so that you get the class sizes down, right? And that's another way to solve the problem. You could basically reschedule the building in the third trimester. But again, I mean, these are drastic changes that are quite disruptive. And given how much time is left in the school year, depending on what they're really asking of us, I think we have to wait and play this out. Everybody wants to bring the students back. That's what we want to do. But, for so many reasons that we're building a new high school, this building is a particularly challenging problem for the district, especially considering how understaffed we are.
Has there been any indication from the state that the distancing guidelines they're going to do away with those? Or?
None. I'm pretty confident that we'll not only be dealing with them for the rest of this year, but I think there's a good chance that we'll be operating under 3 feet at the beginning of next year.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes, thank you. No matter what we do, people aren't going to be happy, but having seen what my daughter goes through as a freshman, I feel that she's received a woeful education so far. I mean, today, for example, she had one class where they had just a check-in and that was it. No homework was assigned, nothing. So she spent that period doing nothing. And I find that is truly unacceptable. And we need to do the hard work and get these students back in class. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Domenici?
Superintendent Sawyer, I apologize if I missed this, and I know we want to wait to see what kind of guidance comes down for the high school. But in assessing, what do you think the capacity is? compared, you know,
Capacity for what?
in other words, we can't do 100% of the students full return. We've proven that that's not possible with the constraints in the building and constraints with staffing and, you know, but is there,
I'll say this, we can't operate our normal programs.
right,
Under 3-year guides. We could make all kinds of changes, right? Like, so in any, you know, in any period, there are empty rooms and full rooms and, you know, it's a very complicated situation. So it's not that it can't be done on paper. It can't be done the way the building normally operates.
right, and I get that. I simply meant like under where we currently are, is there any capacity, like we can increase to like 2/3 of our students and still fit within the educational model we've been dealing with all year versus, you know, so we can't fully get everyone, but we can get a few more in, and maybe a few, you know, like instead of the 2 days in, maybe it's 3 days in.
So
Something like that.
one of the challenges to bringing back something between half and full is
Right.
that, you know, you have to be able to accommodate for the students who aren't there. Right? And if we were a district, or if in this district, at the high school, we had the technology to live stream classes like they can in some districts. And like we could theoretically in some of our schools outside of the high school, then, you know, you could think about having, you know, more students in on any given day, and but the kids that are home would be, you know, participating remotely, right? Like but through live streaming. The problem is that the infrastructure in the high school cannot support that level of streaming, you know, for that many people all at once, right? Just the bandwidth is not what it needs to be to accommodate that. Plus, we would have to, I'm sure that our friends at the AA are listening, and we would have to negotiate that kind of a change in their working conditions anyways.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Geddes?
And wouldn't scheduling, wouldn't that, like, to Mr. Domenici's point, we bring in another chunk of students. That doesn't necessarily mean that that chunk of students that may only impact some class sizes. So in other words, you know, a group of kids that are in a history class, when they split up, some of them go to a science class that may still have the same number as if it were cut in half just because of how it was broken up. And the other ones may go to an English class that is completely full and too small of a space. That's
absolutely part of it, right? So if you said, all right, we're going to bring back 2/3 of the kids each day and 1/3 is going to stay home and participate remotely, which again, technologically isn't possible. But if we pretended like it was, you're right. There's no way to do it so that you ensure that in any one class that the numbers work out, right? So, you know, if you did it by first period, so there's 2/3 in every room, everybody's fine. When everyone switches next period, you'll have one room in which there's still a small number of kids, and the room next door, you'll have too many more kids than actually fit into it. So yes, that's from a scheduling perspective, it gets almost impossible.
Thank you.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes, I have a suggestion. I don't know if it's even feasible, but why don't we do what you do in the elementary schools? Keep the kids in the classroom and just have the teachers move. I know in some aspects you wouldn't be able to do that, like science, if they had to do a project, but it's an idea that, you know, could potentially work.
But there's no like 25 kids who all take the same thing, right? Each kid has a specialized schedule. And so they're almost, well, they're not all unique, but there's almost no group of students that would fill a class that they all take the exact same class, all 5 periods, right? So, you know, I take this class, we take this class together, but then the next period, we have to go to different places because to fit in all the classes I wanted this year, my schedule is different than almost, you know, not everybody else's, but there's not a lot of overlap on that. In fact, in the summer, when we talked about how do we schedule the high school, given that we were going to, you know, get be able to, need to be able to ready to go from remote to hybrid to full in person. We talked through how could we do what the rest of the district is doing logistically. And the answer is we'd have to so limit the choices of the students that we thought that educationally that was worse than what we've been living with, which, by the way, nobody likes, right? Nobody's defending it. Nobody thinks that it's, as good as we can do when we're all, back in full in person, right? That's what we're good at. That's what we're set up for. But as bad as this is, the things that we would have to do to make some of these other things work, we think are worse. And to get it so that we could cohort a group of students at the high school, you basically would have to limit them to the kind of choices you get at the middle school, which is, basically everybody gets the same thing. And you don't really get a choice in even what your electives are, right? Like you get everything. So it doesn't really fit a high school model. And to my knowledge, there's not another high school that's handling the problem that way.
Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know you guys are doing the work now to figure out how this can be done, because I would imagine if the guidance comes down, we're going to have to do this. But even if the guidance doesn't come down next month or May, ultimately by September, we have to assume we're going to need to do something of this nature. Come September, I know things can change between now and then, and they probably will, but in some level, we're going to be back in school, full in person.
So an important factor that I think has to be understood here is that the conditions of the pandemic weren't fully clear to all of us in terms of what this September was going to look like until the scheduling process at the high school was basically over. It takes 6 months to schedule a high school. It is, people should really step back and appreciate what Attleboro High School offers its students. There are no high schools anywhere around here that offer as many things as we do, right, to meet the needs of so many students. And to work through and be able to provide all of those different opportunities, right? The great range that we do requires months and months and months and months of planning. And so when the pandemic hit, after all that was done, we took a hard look in July on what we could pull off. And in the end, the decision was not to blow up the schedule and completely water it down to the simplest possible version we could imagine, was that we wanted to try to deliver as much as we could. And that's led to problems. And, maybe in retrospect, that wasn't the best way to handle it, but that is the decision we went with. The difference between this year and next year is that we're building this year's schedule fully anticipating what next year is going to look like, right? We know that we're planning to live under guidance in September, and we're making decisions in the scheduling process that's ongoing as we speak right now to ensure that none of the things that are in the way right now are going to be in the way then. So, it's a real difference in terms of what we can do when you bake into the schedule some of these considerations. And the high school's made significant adjustments in this scheduling year process because they know that they have these problems coming for next year. So no one should anticipate that we're having this conversation for next year.
Good to hear. And a follow-up. So right now, until the end of the year, the virtual academy is staying in place. Is that correct?
Correct.
So with all this discussion regarding full in person, the virtual academy is going to finish out at least the remainder of this school year. And per the guidance that we've seen so far, it's questionable whether or not that will or will not be allowed come September. So what I'm hearing from you right now is we can barely do this at the high school with the virtual academy in place. And if the virtual academy is not allowed, and maybe we can ask for a waiver or what have you come September, but from the guidance that I've seen from Riley so far, it looks like they're not going to allow that. Again, waiver could be asked for or what have you, but will it be possible, here we are 6 months ahead of schedule, planning and what have you, to have all students back come September?
The short answer to that is yes. Now, as much as the conditions under which we can operate virtually are going to be very, very different next year. And so, as I've said, the ABA is never going away entirely. It's not, we have started with 1,200 students in it this year. It's not going to be anything at that scale next year. And there's going to be much less freedom to do it that way next year. The state has made it very clear they intend to take that away. But there were always ways in which we could be doing offsetting some of that. And we're going to have students next year who cannot return, right? I'm being told that we shouldn't anticipate that any students are vaccinated come September. We believe high school age kids will start being vaccinated around that time, and that elementary students won't get vaccinated until January. So there are going to be students who start the year next year who cannot return, right? For medical reasons. So all isn't truly going to be all next year, but many of the kids who are in the ABA this year will be returning, which I think is ultimately what your point is. And yes, I think we can accommodate them with the planning to do so, right? Because, when you remove the kids, while in some rooms, that means, there are fewer kids and so it's easier to space them out, and that is the case. What happens in a lot of places is that, you end up cutting a section of a thing out, right? So there were, because again, the high school's so big, right? So there were 15 sections of this course, English 2, whatever it is. And so now that we have 50 fewer sophomores, I'm just making up numbers, we'll cut 2 sections of it because we're also moving an English teacher to the ABA, right? So when you end up cutting out the sections, you still end up with the same high class sizes, right? I mean, class sizes at the high school are not low. We moved high school staff to the ABA. So when they come back, that's going to help. And it's not the number of rooms we have that's the problem. It's the size of the rooms and the number of kids in the rooms. All right, so again, unless the state forces our hand otherwise, it's ultimately a decision of the committees, but it is my opinion that at this stage, we should let them continue their planning. We can get a more detailed report as to terms of, what that really looks like, and continue to listen to what the state has to say and have this discussion again.
Mr. Gaddis?
I'm sorry, just for clarification, when does the 3rd trimester start?
I believe it just started.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm not sure this fits in exactly into how this conversation went, but I want to point out, and maybe it does help here. The planning we did this summer in many ways was pointless because the state has changed the playing field, moved the goalposts, as they like to say, on multiple occasions throughout this process without warning at times. And, listen, we do what we have to do. When we make every adjustment we need to be where we need to be, that's what we do, right? But it's part of why this has been so difficult and why we struggle is because, they gave us a set of rules that we thought we were going to be operating under, and then they have changed them at will, again, sometimes without warning. And that has just really made it difficult for us because school systems are not set up to make mid-course changes, right? We're set up to kick off a year, let it play out, end the year, and then make your changes between years. And we just don't have the staff to both run the district safely from day to day with kids in the building and make significant alterations of how we operate, right? There's just not the manpower to do it. We don't have the capacity for it. So we planned on a reality that was, I think they intended well. I mean, it was well intended, right? That's what they thought it was going to be, and things have changed. I recognize some of the decisions to change things are precisely because we now know more than we did. That's all understandable, but when I talk to other superintendents, it's a shared frustration that there's a little bit of indifference to how hard it is to turn a cruise ship around. That's what these things are, right? We're a big giant boat, not a nimble craft. So moving on to other subjects, I just had a couple other things I wanted to tell you about tonight. The first is you might be aware that there is a junior hockey team here in Attleboro, the Northeast Generals. They are already a partner with the schools. We've been doing various programming with them. Last year in particular, they really got involved with our PTOs. So, This is not a new relationship, but I wanted to inform the committee that next year, we're going to be looking to helping them provide educational services for their athletes who are moving to Attleboro to be part of that team. And so as they will be living in Attleboro, there are Attleboro kids, and we're going to find a way to support them in meeting those educational needs. So that's a exciting development that we'll keep you informed about exactly what that looks like as we proceed. Another quick note, we're going to have to find a new home for our school committee meetings as part of preparations for life under full return. This space has to be set up in a way that can't accommodate us clearing it out every time we have a meeting. So we'll be working with AACS to try to find another location that we can meet safely in person. Of course, our home, the Zito, is not large enough to do that under current guidelines. We can't all fit in there at 6 feet. So we're gonna have to find another spot. We'll keep you informed, but this will likely be our last meeting here at one setup. And then finally, I'm about to turn it over to Ms. Regan to talk about the calendar. First, I'd like to point out, I apologize, but we made a mistake on the agenda. Tonight's item is not about the 21-22 calendar. It's about the 2020-2021 calendar. So I apologize for that. I just wanted to say that the change that we're asking you to consider tonight is needed for a safe implementation of our plans for a return to full in person, and an action is required by the committee to make those changes. So to explain what we're asking for, I'll turn it over to Ms. Regan.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. As he already mentioned tonight, there are several things that are being done to prepare for the full return, and looking at the calendar and reorganizing it is one of those things. And so there are 3 items that I wanted to discuss tonight. One is taking the half-day professional development day that was scheduled on April 16th and moving it to March 31st. And then the full day professional day scheduled on April 1st will be used as a transition day for teachers to prepare for the full in-person learning. And so with that day, the last day for students will be on June 16th, 2021.
And just to refresh the committee and everyone's memory, the calendar is different this year than in most years with less required days. And at the end of the year, we banked a couple of days for purposes like this. Could you just kind of explain what was done and what we have left?
Sure. So under the emergency regulations that DESE provided, they provided us with 10 days. And as a result, we had 3 days that we had in the bank, so to speak. 1 day was used for the November 3rd professional development day. The second day is being used for April 1st. And then the last day is being used to cover the snow day on December 10th.
What did you say the last day for students would be?
June 16th.
Any other questions or comments on the proposal? And I would entertain a motion to amend the 2020-2021 school calendar as presented by Superintendent Regan, moving the half day from April 16th to March 31st, making April 1st a professional development day, so no school for students, and the last day of school for students being June 16th.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes, Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like you're up next, Mr. Furtado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're asking the committee's consideration of an amendment to our Sodexo contract. This is the second one. We had one last August or maybe even May. where this is the extra cleaning we're doing every week. The first amendment carried us through December. This amendment will carry us through April, and there'll be one more to clean up through the end of the year, and then a decision to be made regarding the following school year. But this is the same level of staffing, the same process we've been following since September.
So I entertain a motion to further amend the Sodexo contract to continue the level of staffing from January 1st through April 16th, 2021.
Second,
Any discussion or questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Geddes?
just to be clear, this is 11 custodians, 1 quality assurance monitor, so it's 1 custodian per building and 3 at the high school.
I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Storrs?
The cost
42.
40, yeah. So the 140,000, that's coming from where?
These may be being paid out of the COVID grants that we're receiving from the federal government.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes. I believe that concludes the consent business agenda tonight.
It does.
Thank you. Next, we have our minutes from our March 8th, 2021 meeting. Minutes were circulated with your packets. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second,
Any discussion or edits? All right, Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Consent agenda, 5 items I'll read tonight. Motion to accept an anonymous donation, the amount of $3,900 to the Attleboro Public Schools to be used at the superintendent's discretion. Motion to accept a donation, the amount of $3,000 from the J.S. Lim Foundation for scholarship gifts donations. Motion to accept the contractual obligation, the amount of $46.50 from Planet Aid, Inc., as broken down on the check receipt dated March 11th, 2021. Motion to accept a payment in the amount of $2.25 from Bay State Textiles to Hill Roberts. And motion to accept a donation in the amount of $600 from Susan M. Fortin for outstanding lunch balances allocated as follows: $200 to Studley Elementary School, $200 to Thatcher Elementary School, and $200 to Coelho Middle School.
So moved.
Second,
Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, do we still need to do a roll call since everyone's here in person?
Good question. I'm going to continue. I don't think we do, but I'm going to do it just to round out Wamsutta for us. Thank you. It's the first time we've been in person for so long. Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Withers? Yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
That concludes our agenda tonight. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.